Welcome back to Lateral Lawyers Podcast. This is actually our first episode in our new studio, and Mark is back after we had, let's call it a slight mishap last week when we tried to record and we had some technology issues. I should say I had some technology issues, didn't I, Mark?
I'm impressed with the whole setup here, Shane.
It's put it this way, you know how they say you should stick to the knitting, whether you're a commercial lawyer or an agent or a photographer or a videographer, I suppose is the word. Well, I learnt that out the hard way, and look, we're not a big fancy law firm that has hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to invest in this type of stuff, so I've had to do it somewhat on the cheap side and be inventive and come up with this technology to put this technology together rather to get the broadcast as smooth and as professional looking as possible. So it's been a journey, as John Mitchell, the former All Blacks coach, would say. And look, it's great to have Mark on here today. Mark Honeybone is the owner of Propertyventure, or one of the owners. We've just done his shareholders agreement for him and brought on some minority shareholders, which seems to be, a great model for a business like his, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Honeybone, welcome to the show. And Mark is going to tell us a little bit about his journey, and there is some real hidden gems in there from knowing some of Mark's personal story. So welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. And this is making my non-professional podcast I do even more non-professional now. This is a great setup you got, so well done.
Thank you. So, Mark, do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, how you got into property, and then some of the highs and lows, and then on to maybe some of the events in your personal life that you and I talked about last week?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm just, I'll say, a simple farm boy. Brought up in a small pig farm in North Canterbury. Went to the military, knew not a lot about anything, to be fair. Certainly didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, and was scared in talking in front of any more than two people. Moved forward, I bought my first property when I was about 30, so I rented all the time until I was 30. Paid $107,000 for a property in Blenheim. I sold it 3 years later and lost $3,000 for $104,000. So
what year was that you paid that?
Great start. That would have been what's that, about 25 years ago or 24 years ago, whatever that works out to be. That would be
95, 96.
Mid-early 90s it was, when I first started. And it was just where the market was. I knew nothing about property anyway back then. I'm a bit of a late starter, but that was the first introduction to it. So but I learnt more from that. But I guess what happened is, I remember one day one of my fellow workers I worked with was telling me one lunch hour about property and how it doubles every 10 years and you can leverage from it. I didn't even know what leverage meant, to be fair. And it got me excited, and I ended up going to a course, many of you might know it from a long time ago, called the Rich Mastery Courses, Phil Jones and his merry men. And I went to a night thing in class thing in Blenheim. It was just a 4-hour seminar, and I got a lot out of it. And we spent $4,000, which was a hell of a lot of money for me, or for us. $4,000 back then was a terrific amount of money. And I went in this course up into Auckland for a 3-day or 4-day course, and that started my property, learning a lot about property and what I should be doing properly. And it also introduced me to a life coach called Kira Cashley, who's a gobby-wee American guy living in Australia, but he's done and had a lot of his own stories that he's done over the years. And I guess from him, on the personal level, it was the start of my growth as a 7-year-old bloke that wasn't very confident about anything and didn't know a lot about life. And that was the start of my journey, I guess, from improving myself and learning all about the world and how it operates and abundance. And I could talk for hours on that, but I won't go too much just yet.
There's a lot of really good information out there from particularly Gary Vaynerchuk, who I'm an enormous fan of and feel like I owe a lot of my recent success and ability and growth in my personal and professional life too, in terms of he's big on the concept that, say, late 30s, early 40s, early 50s for that matter, is not old, and that it is actually people more in those age brackets than, say, the 25-year-olds that are together enough personally and professionally, have grown enough to be able to deal with starting a business. So you sound like your life story somewhat echoes the sentiments of what Gary's expressing.
Yeah, the great thing I love about life success coaches is there's so many different types of courses or people you can do. At the end of the day, they're all very similar. They all portray it different, and if you find one you can gel with and you really resonate with, that's an amazing thing. But the stories are all similar in how you treat life and embrace life and have that cup half full rather than the half empty, and don't make excuses for anything. And you and me could both make excuses about things we've done in the past, but you don't. You learn from experiences, and it makes you a better person. So that's sort of how I did it, I guess. But I guess as far as my personal story goes, is really as far as my first crisis I had of many. I won't say the first, but the first big one. The first sort of crisis, I guess, started when, after I'd been trading property for a little while, I was pretty confident, probably a bit cocky, and I brought two off-the-plan places in Christchurch. It was quite ironic because I buy off-the-plan properties now 15 years later and help others to do that and do it properly, and I guess not to make mistakes that I made. But in effect, I brought a property off the plans. There's a whole lot of reasons why it went wrong. You might ask me that later on. But what happened was we lost about $200,000 on that deal, which was almost superannuation that I had earned or got after working for 20 years. That went, and we had a mortgage on our family home of more than it was worth. In fact, the family home I had to buy because it was a trade at the sort of top of the financial crisis, and we couldn't on-sell it, so we ended up moving to it. Ended up a great thing. It was a great family home, but certainly not the reason why we want to buy it. Had two kids, about 10 and 12, starting, cost a bit of money. You don't want to stop your kids doing sports and all those good things they like doing. And at that stage, I just, the job that I was doing, had sort of, a trading job with two others had sort of fallen by, and and that wasn't too good. I ended up going across to Blenheim to Nelson 3 or 4 days a week working for a building company, and for about $20 an hour. And so my life, after I lost that money, was sitting there pretty average. And if you go forward another year after that, I found out I had about this disease in the heart that I get. It's a flesh-eating disease called cardiac sarcoidosis. And that when I went to the doctor about that, my heart was beating at 31 beats a minute, which is apparently not that good. And I was lucky to be alive, I guess. So we'll say at that point, it was a bit of a low point in my life, and the my wife back then did remarkably well to stick by me through all those years. And so that was a low point of, I guess, the first of low points without the health issues, which we'll talk about shortly. So one of the important times was a critical part of my life, I guess, was I worked with two business partners and trading property, and that all sort of fell over at the height of them, just after the financial crisis. I said I was extremely sick at the time. I was taking 60, in fact, got up to 80 milligrams of prednisone, which is I
know what it is, yes.
You know what that is?
Yep.
And that's a drug that not a lot of people can take because it affects you pretty badly when you take 60 milligrams like I did for a long period of time.
Yes.
And it can play with your mind and do a lot of bad things. So I was in a crisis situation. I said I was going to Nelson every day. I didn't want to do that. I got a phone call one week from 3 different mortgage brokers, and they said, "Mark, I hear you're working on your own now. If so, we want to start working with you and sending clients your way." And I thought, at that stage, I was a pretty good trade, and I could get a deal, even though my one didn't work out too well a few years earlier. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, this is pretty good, and gave me a bit of confidence. So I sat down that weekend, and I remember on a Sunday afternoon going through Trade Me and all the art papers or media that I went through back then. And there were 2 places and places I never even heard of, in Norwood and Ormondville, in the bottom of the Hawke's Bay, and little wee hick towns. And there was the council was selling.
Let's just hope nobody from those towns is listening to the Lateral Lawyers podcast, episode 1.
I didn't say it was a bad town. I said it was a hick town. I'm born from a smaller town than those places, in Hardham, North Canterbury, way smaller than Norwood. Anyway, I love those towns because we found these 2 council blocks of flats, and I just saw an opportunity there, and so what I did, I got them on the contract, on-sold them to people in the database that I know, and made sort of $45K within about a week. And so that was a step that thought, geez, maybe I can do this. I can carry on. And I'm having brokers who are encouraging me. Just a side note from that, I just did a presentation in Auckland about a year and a half ago, and the owners of those, I'm not sure if they bought both of them or one of them, him and her was in the audience and come and say good day afterwards, and that was the best property they ever brought that secured their cash flow. It was amazing cash flow property for the rest of their career, and they've got a lot of property now. So
awesome.
So that's pretty cool. It was good to good to hear that. So that sort of got me back on trading, and that's where now I traded for a few years, and then traded a lot. We'll talk about property later on, but and then got me to the stage where I eventually decided to get my license and start Propertyventures. So,
and when was that, Mark?
I've been up in Auckland for about just over 6.5 years now. So it was about 2 years before that, about 8 years ago, I got my.
And did you start Propertyventures by yourself or with a business partner?
Yes, I started by myself. I had a business partner from overseas, and we were trading property. He was actually financing the deals, and I was sourcing, renovating, and selling them to my database. So I leave equity, and I knew the cash flow my database wanted. So it was a real win all round. And so we sort of started then, but I started a real estate company as such about 6.5 years ago on my own from an office slant bedroom back in Blenheim, and then moved up here 6 or so years ago and got my first lady, Jess, that joined me, and who's an extremely entrepreneurial lady. She should be on this podcast one day, and believe me, she probably will be.
We'd love to have her.
So that's it. We started there then back in about 6.5 years ago in Auckland. So that was all good. I guess as far as the business goes, 6.5 years ago was a massive decision for me, where a lot of my clients were in Auckland, and a lot of people from around the world wanted to buy in Auckland, and I was sitting down there in Blenheim, and I could only rely on business people or friends so much to do work for me. So I left my family, 2 kids and wife in Blenheim and then home, and come up here and started Propertyventures, and that's where Propertyventures was really born. And we soon changed as a buyer's agency, one of the first in New Zealand to do that, to running like a normal real estate company. Although 6.5 years ago we are different than a normal real estate company because of where we started. We look after our buyers and our investors really well with podcasts and videos and newsletters and God knows what sort of thing. So that's all good stuff. In the meantime, that mindset thing was happening that I was had learned a few years earlier. Just things. I was the most unconfident person, and one of the things I learned there was about you are who you hang around with. They say the 10 people around you will earn roughly the same money, and it'd be the same sort of mentality in life, and that's true within reason. But all of a sudden I was up here and I was meeting. That's why I come up here, because I met one person. But I was up here and I was hanging around with people who are earning $300,000 to well over $1 million a year, and for me, that from going back a few years earlier, I couldn't even talk to those people, let alone even know where to find them, and they were just my friends.
Well, you probably could have, but you perceived you couldn't. I hear what you're saying. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, exactly that it is. And I'm not saying someone that earns $300K or $1 million is better than anyone else who earns maybe 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever K. But one thing I got respect from a lot of those people, they were small to medium business owners, and they employ a lot of New Zealanders that need them to create lives for their family and stuff. So they're pretty important people, and I never even thought about that before, until those days. And so I started getting a lot of respect for them. And there's there's good and bad people with every spectrum of the earning caliber, and it's just the way life is.
What was it about these people, these entrepreneurial people, reasonably high income earners? What was it about them initially that you admired and tried to emulate?
Well, there's one. He's in charge of a large chartered accountancy firm here in Auckland, and the first time I ever heard him speak at a Rich Mastery event, actually, and I just thought he was unbelievable when he got up there. He was so knowledgeable. He was all the things that I wasn't confident, and even he was talking about wills with his son, how he would sort that out when he'd get his money at an appropriate stage of life when he was trained up with property and investing, so he knew what to do with it, so he wouldn't waste it. So it was just, for me, it was a real eye opener with how that these people sort of were and operated and had good morals still underneath it all. Even though on the front of it, people might not know people when they're up there in front of any media type people or famous sports people. They might not, they might be portrayed as something they're not, I guess. Yep. So I learned a lot from him, and then moved forward a few years. He actually ended up my business partner in Auckland because he provided clients to me, and I provided another company for him. Yes. So for me, working with them was unbelievable, to be fair, to start off with. And I guess I didn't stop growing. I grew and grew and grew in the next 5.5 years, and he taught me a lot about business. He taught me to be a harder businessman, make the big decisions, but make them correct and make them right. And I guess for him, maybe I'll soften him up a little bit, even though he might not admit it. He might do. But so, I kept growing where, in fact, 5 years later, which was just over a year ago, I went back and said, hey, I need to actually buy you out. And I've got some business partners who were in the business. It made sense for them to work in the business or to have ownership of the business. So that's what I did then. So they come in. I asked him, sorry, I want to buy you out, which is something even to talk to this guy 8 years earlier.
Was that nerve-wracking?
Well, I don't know. It was a little bit, but I was just confident in my own abilities, and which I wasn't. I was average 5 years earlier, and had no confidence in my abilities 20 or 10 years earlier. So that went well. But I put in his lingo why he would understand what I was saying with people in his business, and that worked. So that was all good. I guess the other side of it, I had my financial crisis. I guess at the same time the world financial crisis happened. I can't blame them for that. Well, part of it was my fault. But I guess in the last 5 years I've had more challenges, and that's been my health side of it. So I changed 14 or 15 years ago when I started learning about learning from a life success coach, and I changed a lot. But then 5 years ago, I changed again pretty quickly. So I had a major operation. In fact, it was about 2 months before my 50th birthday, and I got the news of this operation that had coming up to do with this disease that I had, and I truly believed on my 50th birthday that it was going to be my last birthday. And I'm a pretty confident guy, as you're probably realising when listening to this. And but I truly believed it was. I had a bad few months, and I had no energy and no anything. That was in December. I went to about, I think, May or June. I think June the operation was. And I had some open heart surgery. Open heart surgery is fairly common for people who have heart attacks and need stents and stuff. But that was not my problem. My problem was my heart goes too slow, and I already had a pacemaker there, so they moved that. They removed something from that was over the heart that shouldn't have been there. Did some heart valve repair. They put a defib in me. They just did whatever they wanted to me over about 14 hours. And so I had 3 months off after that. So that was a difficult time running a wee business. And then just recovering from that time, my wife decided to move up here, and then my son moved up here. My daughter was already here. But so 6 months after that, my hip, I had a car accident when I was 19 and should have had a hip replacement 10 or 20 years ago, but being stubborn as I was, I didn't, and then I needed it. So I had a full hip replacement on the right hip. And that was all right, getting through that. That went pretty well, as good as it could go. And I just started the exercise, which you need to do to get the hip moving, which is really important. And then I just started having no energy again. And when I say no energy, I remember when I used to live in the metropolis in the middle of Auckland, I'd get out of my car and it'd be about 100 metres away from the lift. And I'd sit there and it'd be just a slight gradient going up to the hill. And I'd sit there, get out of my car, and I'd be huffing and puffing and go, how the hell am I going to get up here to get in the lift to go to my room? And that's how I lived for 6 months before the first operation, and especially the second one as well. So the second one had a ablation procedure. It was that's just when the top of the heart's not talking to the bottom of the heart, and it's sort of it's not a nice not the regular rhythm you have. It's a bit more like Morse code than a good song. And so I had that, and it's a relatively common operation, but you feel great immediately after you felt really poor for such a long time. So I had that at that, and it's been good, and that was just over 2 years ago, and the heart hasn't missed a beat. In fact, I got some mail 2 days ago. I have something beside my bed that monitors me every night, and hasn't missed a beat now for well over 2 years, which is good. And I now am getting a bit cocky that I might even live to the right old age for another 15 or 20 years. So as long as I'm happy during those 20 years and a fit, that's all pretty good. Because what I've learned out of that is you just don't know when something can happen in your life like that. It can happen walking across the road back to my car over there, and you can be in a wheelchair, you can have no energy, have whatever, you can have a limb taken off, or you can die, whatever.
Yes.
So I guess what I've changed again in the last 5 years immensely is I really value every day as a lot of life, and I'm appreciative of every day that I have happy and healthy. And if people out there and they do their wee mindset thing every day and what they're grateful for, and one thing I like about COVID is they start on the radio about 10 things you're grateful for every day. Because I've been doing that for quite a while, and that's really important. And the first thing for me every day is the health and fitness, that I can get up and go for a run and do what most people can do is pretty cool.
That 10 things you're grateful for is a real cornerstone of some of the recovery programs I've done.
Yeah.
And dealing with addiction problems, and it is an enormously, as is praying in the morning. You don't even have to be a follower or a fan of any kind of denominational religion. Just getting on your knees and thinking about those less fortunate than yourself, and they may be people with great material wealth or success. They may be, it could be a bloody pop star or a rock star, for God's sake. It doesn't matter. It's anyone of our fellow humans that are going through moments where you think of your lowest point, or you just don't feel good, you don't want to be here perhaps, or you just thinking, when is my luck going to change? When you're under the pump like that, to that extent, just thinking of those people, not only is it a good thing to do to try and be a little bit less selfish in our thinking, but I genuinely believe it makes us happier people to have gratitude for how good we've got it, to not be in that place today, at least, like you said, that can change at any moment. And I think it spares us from this selfish, self-absorbed, I have this much, and if only I had more mentality, which, as you and I both know, Mark, doesn't get us anywhere internally or with our peers.
No, absolutely. And so you have things like that. I know you had a similar thing a few years ago yourself, and it just makes you change how you value life, as you're saying. So for me, a couple of things that I do is I want to maximise my life. So what I mean by that is, if I get invited to an event or something, just do it. Just go, because you might not be able to go tomorrow. Who knows? Anything that makes you happy, just do it as pretty well. And don't have regrets. So, I don't have regrets anyway. But don't have regrets. So if you get offered something today that you go, I'll do it another day, or I'll do it in a year's time, or whatever. Just do it. Look at COVID, how that's come along in a year and a half. I was extremely fortunate just September before COVID to be over to the Greek islands and Italy for a month, and in France, what a fantastic time that was. Yep. Little did I know, 4 or 5 months later, that would be, you just couldn't do it for another however many years.
Yeah, we went and saw Elton John just literally, I think it was 2 weeks before COVID, and we got locked down, and Luella and I went, and I remember saying to her, like, this is super cool. Like, this guy's 70 or whatever he is, he's in his early 70s. And I said, we may not, not many people may see him again. It's a super cool thing to go and do, even though it was like 200 and something per ticket.
Yep.
And as it turned out, that was truer than either of us realised the night we went and saw him. And, walking back from the concert, I got into a bit of sort of biffo, not really biffo, more sort of a verbal spat with this joker, because he was complaining that Elton went off sick. And I said to him, mate, if number one, you got to see him play for 2 hours 20, you got most of his club bangers, and imagine if someone came to your work every day and put the bloody camera on you, how would you hold up? So give the guy some slack. He didn't like that very much, but that was completely okay with me. I made my point. Yeah,
I was at the same concert, in fact, and
it was awesome,
extremely
right?
fortunate to be about 8 or 9 rows from the front. First time I've ever been to the mosh pit, because I had seats for the oldies.
There was no mosh pit at that concert, I couldn't tell you that. No.
Yeah,
but it was very cool. It was incredible, and just to see him, he wasn't obviously very well, but just absolutely pumping out the hits and those little feet going and shit. It was hard work, wasn't it? It wasn't easy. It was effortless in the sense it sounded incredible. You saw how much effort went into it. It's not easy being a rock star.
No, it's not. But even I remember the doctors come on stage, and he was just he come back on, and he just focused again, 100%, gave it his all for everyone that was there, sort of thing. Knowing you might not be doing the whole concert, but just I love it when you see the passion from people and they just get in there and go 100%, no matter what, for the purpose. Is pretty cool to see.
In the last 5 years, with these challenges in your personal life with your health, how have you kept yourself afloat professionally and grown and learnt from that, and you know, to the point that today you've got a successful, growing real estate agency, which you absolutely, you know, is your pride and joy, and you love getting in there, and you tell me like you're doing deals. And I remember when I first met you through a client of mine saying, you've got to meet this agent. He's a great agent. Now, I might have thought that was an oxymoron before I met you and a few other agents, but I'm sure people say this. Well, in fact, I know people saying the same about us lawyers. So how have you put all that together in a way that is glass half full and propelled yourself forward with it?
Yeah, it was certainly a challenge with I had no choice when I was going to hospital off work for 3 months sort of thing, that I had to do something. So that was a big test of where Propertyventures was, I guess. But so the thing, I guess what has happened over about a 3-year period is 2.5 year period, Propertyventures didn't grow that much, but it kept its own, and it's you know, for a while I was sitting there doing everything on the business side of it and still doing deals and what have you. I don't know how I managed. I didn't. I got sick.
Well, sometimes my experience has been for both my business and those are some of my clients I have more intimate relationships with. Sometimes, and we say the same thing in the recovery community, sometimes just putting one foot in front of the other and staying upright is the best you can do in a particular epoch or period of your life. That is the best you can hope for, and you should be give yourself a pat on the back for that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just the best you can manage.
Yeah, and that is progress. So if you do that on the hard
because you're still around to actually capitalise and on the foundations you're building. When the time is right, the stars align, and you actually have the energy and the right mindset to go and apply yourself in a way where you have growth on paper, tangible growth, as opposed to just. But yeah, I think those periods where you just manage to stay upright, if you can do that, a friend of ours lately has just been through marriage, separation, and a really catastrophic, difficult personal circumstance, and he's now getting going again, and it's really cool to watch. But you know, it's not an easy thing to do, but I don't think people give enough credit to people for just being able to manoeuvre themselves through upright.
Absolutely. So, you know, I've been very fortunate. Some really good people and passionate people. Most people who have joined Propertyventures have come here because they've wanted to work with us or me or whatever it might be. And we've gone from, you know, me and two of us when we first started to 23 of us, I think the latest count is, which is fantastic and quite humbling when there's 23 families that rely on us to, you know, to get them going every day and every year, which is pretty cool. And I guess what I've done of late, because I've learned the art of delegating, and I had to as we got bigger or larger, and you know, we've got 2 people in the company that are shareholders, and there's one other, and you know, one looks after one part of the business, and you know that I've set it up so they're incentivised for that business to do really well. So they're pushing everyone in the business. So the agents and salespeople want to do well. Obviously, they make their money and survival from selling properties, and we try to teach them to do it the right way and ethically and all those good things. But he's incentivised to make sure all the people are doing really well and working well, because if they work well, he's going to get paid bonuses and paid well. And then the other side of the business, the same thing. He gets something for every part of the second side of the business that happens. So again, whoever does well on that side of the business, he gets well rewarded from that. And then of course I've got the overall picture now of working for every obviously want Propertyventures to be the most successful business it can be and grow, but do it at not a fast level. Just do it so it's doing it well and keep all the other parts of it, the team clicking over, and obviously I get benefits from all that. So everyone's incentivised to do well in their respective area, and they're really helpful. So yeah, so that has been a challenge over the last sort of years, but it's great now because now I'm feeling the healthiest and fittest that I've probably been for 15 plus years.
Awesome.
So that
looking great.
That helps from the top, mate. So that's all good.
Looking great. Looking really good.
Yeah, I probably lost too much weight in the last 6 months somehow. So I just stopped drinking alcohol for a couple of months, and I just cut it right down now. I still have a few drinks here and there, but just made a conscious effort to watch what I was eating, and started exercising. And I didn't want to lose weight. I didn't have much to lose, but I've lost about 7 or 8 kilograms. And but I'm the thing I've got out of it is I'm feeling really fit, healthy, and that helps. And when you do get under pressure and stuff, if you're feeling fit and healthy, it's a bit easier to make good decisions, I think.
You have more internal resistance for sure. Do you want to walk us through, Mark, before we wrap it up, do you want to walk us through just maybe a little bit of a topical discussion around what's happening in the market at the moment? Maybe you could touch on, I think there was a really interesting comment you made earlier about buying off the plans and it was a disaster, and you say you now do it and counsel others to do it all the time in a way that's mitigates or minimises that risk. Because obviously the way that the tax law changes have arguably been designed to encourage people to buy new builds. Could you perhaps talk about a little bit about your experience, what happened, if you don't mind, and also how you have learnt to create a framework around yourself to mitigate that risk from buying off the plans?
Yep, no, great. And you're right, the new rules just announced a few weeks ago and have definitely encouraged people to sell their older 40, 50, 60-year-old stock and go into new builds. And I'm seeing people and investors that were never going to buy a new builder off the plans, and now they are. So that's one thing that sort of the government has encouraged, and I can talk why there's perhaps some defects with that for having less rentals around for the rental market, but we won't get into that just yet maybe. So yeah, going back, getting my memory, I try to block out those bad things that happened all those years ago. But there's a few things.
Good from your perspective, but we want to obviously educate some of our listeners. So you're a what's the word? Not perickets. You're a martyr for the cause.
Yeah, I do, and I love new builds, and I buy them myself now. So there's a few things that happened early on. It was 15, 16 years ago. One, I was inexperienced, which is fine. If you've got good people around you, you can be inexperienced. I guess the first thing was finding out about the developer, and I had a developer that was doing his first development. It was only three builds, so subdivided for three houses on it. Never developed before, had no experience, and then what happened from that? It got delayed, and it got delayed, and it got delayed and delayed, and then the financial crisis happened, and then the place that, because I was inexperienced, wasn't quite as good buy as I thought, and the market just dropped and dropped and dropped, and that part of in Christchurch at that time, Christchurch had a pretty big fall at that financial crisis back then. For example, our ones were valued at 440. I bought two of them for 400, and I ended up selling them for about 320 each, 315 and 320. Of course, the other part of that, which would have avoided that, I could have had a clause. So the first one is look at the developer, and you can find out what developers are like. Just talk to other people in the game. That's the first way to do it. There's a lot of ways you can find out.
Yeah, but it's a really difficult. That's a difficult task sometimes, because the developer that did my apartment block, we've got issues with our balcony. We're going through the High Court at the moment of proceedings. Hughes Construction, Brian Hughes. It turned out that we put the blowtorch, so to speak, on Crockers, who manage ours, to find out if there had been other Hughes Construction developments that had actually had leaky issues. It turned out yes. Although when I purchased through a friend who also had a unit in there, they had a very good reputation. So it's a really tricky area. I agree with you. Do find out about the developer, but even developers, it seems sometimes with good reputations, it's just a really difficult area to navigate.
Yeah, that is. So all you can do is as much research as you can in that due diligence period and find out. And hey, things still do go wrong, and hopefully insurance or whatever will help out at some case of it. The second most important thing was I didn't have a thing called a sunset clause. Again, being inexperienced and didn't have the right people around me, I didn't really know what a sunset clause was. Now, sunset clause, there's two sunset clauses. One for the vendor that used to give, for the developer, used to give new builds a bad reputation 10, 20 years ago, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But the one you need to have as a purchaser, and it's just a must-have, what I didn't have, was usually if a development's due to finish in, say, June this year, they'll put a sunset clause in, which means it's got to be finished by June next year. That might seem a long time to you, but if a job's going to take 2 years to do, another year isn't that long. Things can go wrong. You have hold up with products. Look what's happened with COVID. Things can go wrong. So it's usually about a year later. There's 6 months or a year later is a sunset clause. Now, what that means is if it's not completed by that date, you can get your deposit back as a purchaser and get the full refund plus interest, and you get your money back. So the only thing that's cost you is opportunity cost. With that money, you could have done something else with, and that's it. Now, I didn't have that, so
I'll just add a couple of things to that. So you need to come and see somebody like us, a property lawyer, because there are sunset clauses and there are sunset clauses. What I mean by that is that the devil is in the detail. What Mark just described to you then, often these sunset clauses, they are inserted into a contract, and the rider or the handle on them is sunset clause. But if you actually read the clause, only the developer has the right to cancel. So it needs to say that it is preferably for the purchaser's benefit only, or at least for the benefit of both parties. And there is sometimes an issue with clauses which are for the benefit of both parties. And I think Mark and I have talked about this previously when we tried to shoot this, and we had some technical problems last week, is that if it is also for the benefit of the developer, if the market's really moved north since you signed the agreement, they could come up with some trite, disingenuous reason why they are cancelling. I mean, if you looked into it and you had the money to pursue them, you could probably succeed in the claim if that trite reason was not in good faith. If it turned out to be a load of baloney, they just wanted to sell it to someone else for $200K more. So you ideally want it just for your benefit. The other thing as well is, if you're dealing with an inexperienced developer and that deposit is paid and there's no obligation to hold the deposit in the solicitor's trust account, or at the very least in the agent's trust account, if there's an agent involved, it's really not worth the paper it's written on having the sunset clause, because if that isn't an experienced institutional developer, if they go bust, you're going to be an unsecured creditor. You're not going to get a cent back. We had a case recently for a client where we put a caveat very cheekily on a whole development, and we had ASB up in arms saying you can't do that because there's a no caveat clause in the agreement. Our response was, well, if you just give us our frickin' money back for the deposit, which you contractually agreed to hold in your lawyer's trust account, and you've now gone all ghost on us, there wouldn't be a problem. I don't think you're going to get very far in the High Court with a judge when the judge says, Mr. Rhodey, you had no right to put that caveat on there and say, well, Your Honour, they took our money and contractually agreed to hold it in the lawyer's trust account, and they haven't. We got it back that night. It was a Friday night at 7 o'clock. A junior lawyer rang me and said, give us your trust account details. So there is devil in the detail. Come and see somebody like us. I know Mark's had experiences in that first instance with no sunset date. But yeah, it really is a lot of the time if you're buying a property and it settles in, say, 6 weeks, other than there being a red herring on the title or in the limb, or a problem with some expensive chattel, like we had one a few years ago with it was an expensive solar system that turned out was only being rented by the vendor, and it wasn't a chattel, even though it was represented as such in the sale and purchase agreement. So other than things like that, normally it's reasonably smooth, but with off the plans, you're relying on a lot of human behaviour over possibly many years, and you need to really study the bejesus out of the agreement to make sure you get good advice.
Absolutely, and that the sunset clause for the developers, you're saying that's what I was going to talk about. That's what's made, I guess, a lot of bad publicity in the last 20 years about new builds, off the plan building, what can happen, because that did happen 10 to 20 years ago quite often, where the place had gone up, each apartment had gone up $200,000, and the developer cancelled every contract, and then they'd pay $200,000 more. So that doesn't happen, luckily, these days very much. I've only seen one clause that we vet all our sale and purchase agreements before we use them, and I've only seen it once, and it really was put in there an error. The developer didn't even know that it was put in there, and it got removed straight away. So that's exactly you go to a good accountant, a solicitor that specialises in property, and you need to have those people on your team. They're the no-brainers. That's what you're doing. You need to have those people on your team. Yep. Just a wee tip with that, though. I've got a bit frustrated with some solicitors. Of course, not a firm like this one here, but if you're into property and doing a lot with property, or you want to start doing a lot with property, go and see your solicitor. Take them out for lunch, take them out for coffee, whatever it is, and make sure they know what you're trying to achieve with property, because especially if you're a newer buyer or a newer investor out there and you rely on your solicitor to help you, which you are doing, all the solicitor is doing is they're there to find risks with you buying what you're buying, and they're paid to do that. they're doing a good job. At times, a deal might come up where there are some risks or whatever, but there might be an amazing story why it is a really good product to buy, if depending on what you're doing, sort of thing. And I'll just use an example. About 2.5 years ago, we had a property that came up that was going to mortgagee sale by another developer. A developer came in and brought the property, and he wanted us to sell 8. There was already 8 finished properties on there. Not great builds. Brought one myself in the end, but they're and he's developing the rest of the section. But as part of the deal, they had a contemporaneous agreement to sell these 8 properties, which we'd had, and we had about 30 buyers within about a week, because they were like $120,000 under value. And we did have a couple. There was 2 new investors and 1 new homeowner that had them under contract, and they let them go. And I just knew it was criminal for them to let go, because they didn't have, I think, experience in property solicitors that understood it all or didn't know what they were trying to achieve. And it sounded risky because it talked about mortgagee sales in there, because the developer was buying a mortgagee sale from another developer. What that actually meant for us, the end buyers, was there was actually not a lot of risk, because if the first developer had gone and messed up some of the properties and what have you, the second developer who we were buying from still had to have a good property, a new property to give to us. There was risk, but not a lot of risk, and especially not with the discount that we were getting, which made the whole process for them, the second developer buying it.
I think what you were saying, I think the whole take them out for lunch. I mean, we love being taken out for lunch, which is fantastic. Mr. Morris is our favourite restaurant at the moment. But I think that is a really good bit of advice, because I think a lot of solicitors will just go either their own fear or fear of being sued or the client being in trouble first before, if you know your client, you take your lawyer out for lunch. If you're a client, you take your lawyer out for lunch and you sit down and you give them like where you're at in your life and the appetite for risk that you have. You might want to divulge how much you earn, do you have children, and how sophisticated are you as an investor that. And at the end of the day, all the solicitor's job is to provide you with enough information and context to make an informed decision. So what that means is you were aware of the risks, understood them, and then were able to weigh up whether or not in the particular with the particular property in mind, whether or not you wanted to take those risks, as opposed to just warning them off in a way that actually doesn't take into account the full life circumstances of the potential purchaser. So that is probably what you mean, I think, Mark, by saying, you want to let the solicitor understand a little bit more about what you're about, where you're at, and because at the end of the day, we just don't want people to buy something which has been represented, often by agents, to be fair,
yep.
As something where it is so glass, not even half full, glass overfilling. And we're there to say, well, actually, it's not, and here are some real risks, and married up with your personal circumstances, there are other, for example, opportunities to have an investment which more marries up with your particular risk appetite and your situation in life. And so I totally agree with you. You need to form that relationship with your lawyer if you're getting really serious about buying property, so they are on the same team as you and they almost adopt your ethos or your mindset when they're assisting you to make decisions, because they've imbued all that context into the decision you're making, as opposed to just, here's all the risks, don't do it, which is almost quite a lazy, unsophisticated way to practice law anyway, to be honest.
Yeah, unfortunately that's how some lawyers do that, and if you're a newer buyer or investor, they don't know any different. So I suggest you go and take all your, not the same week, take all your professionals out for lunch just so they understand. But lawyers are particularly the important one, because they're the ones that you do base some big decisions on. And I guess that got a bit off track there, which is all good. But the third point of what went wrong with me, I guess, was
you were freestyling like a rapper.
Freestyling is great, love it. But the third one, which is I won't get too deep into, but if I knew a bit more, I could have escaped the deal from losing a lot less than I did. Wouldn't have been a necessarily nice way to do it, but the small-time developer, wasn't necessarily very nice back with me, but we could have gone other ways to lose more money, I guess, out of that deal. But just to even forward to now, so that was 15 years ago or 10, 12 years ago, and it stopped me purchasing property for about 7 or 8 years, which was heartbreaking because I was finding these fantastic properties for all these investors of ours. It's probably why everyone likes me so much, because I've given them all the properties I would have taken. So I love property. So opportunity cost over those 7 or 8 years cost me millions of dollars really for what could have happened had I not lost that money.
Mark, what do you look for now with new builds when you're advising potential purchases?
Yep, so the first thing, I guess, is what we spoke about just before with the developer, how experienced they are, because that will also hopefully means that you're buying in a good area, close to public transport and all those good things. But there's many things you look for. One thing I like, if you're just looking for a completed property that's just been finished, and it's your own property to live in, you might pay whatever for it, that's fine. What I love to do, and it's, I guess, coming from the buyer's side of when I first started on the property, I like people getting a deal if they can get it. Not if I'm working for the vendor, I'm working for the vendor and get the best price we can. But especially investors coming on board, if they want to do a deal, the more equity you get, you say when you make money in a property, it's when you buy, you've got to buy well. That's sort of investor's philosophy, I guess. So how do you do that with new builds? And what I do, and that's what I've done the last 3 or 4 years, now I can buy property again, is I buy them from the developer right at the start. So I'm buying the first, second or third property in development. And not always, but most of the developers we use do this. They need finance to get their project across the line, and they need so many what's called pre-sales. So there might be a 25, 30 block, a lot of apartments or townhouses, and they might need 12 pre-sales. So those first 12 that go out are going to be at a very discounted price, and then they'll go up after they're sold, and then another 6 months or another 10 sales or whatever, they'll go up again. And usually, it depends on Christchurch or Auckland, from the first one that sold to the last one that sold is usually somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 of difference. So if you buy early, you get that profit. I call it the market within the development. When I buy off the plans, wanting to buy it well, I don't expect the market outside to go up. If it does, it's a bonus. So it's been a bonus lately. Yes. But if you buy first right at the start, you get that increased profit.
How do lay people who aren't in developed property networks, how do they get those access to those opportunities? Can they get access to those opportunities?
Yeah, when I first started, I thought, geez, how do you do this? And I thought the same thing. I thought you got to know the developer, and then who knows what developer does what sort of thing. And that's one way if you know the developer. Otherwise, you just work with a company that works with several developers, not one that just sells their own stock, but a proper agency of sorts, or someone that deals with a lot of developers, because we've got some now. When the next one in Christchurch comes on board, there's actually a limited number of stuff or new builds to buy at the moment. I've never seen as many new builds or off the plans be sold in the last 6 months from now that I've ever seen in property. There's a real shortage at the moment. So we're starting a list now. So we've got a couple of people for Christchurch. Next one comes up, they're going to get that first, second, third one. We've got there's one development company around here. They build did 6 or 7 in the last few years developments, and they've got 3 or 4 people now. We'll just go and buy one. And I ended up doing that with the one I spoke about before. I wasn't going to buy one, but when 3 people pulled out and it was getting near time, I thought, well, you don't want it, I will. Yep. So I did, and it's been a fantastic investment for me.
Great.
So that's sort of how I talk to a company. I promote Propertyventure real estate, obviously, and go and see Kieran or myself. But there's other companies like us that sell with new builds. So, but work with a company that's not going to put you at the bottom of the line or whatever. Yep. That one you can trust it's going to look after you and get what you want, I guess, is pretty important. So that's just for me, if that takes away a bit of the risk factor, buying early on, and even first home buyers don't like waiting a year and a half. So more in the last 6 months actually are buying now, yes, ahead of time. And for me, that's an incredibly good opportunity for a first home buyer to do that, because when they do settle the property, they've got 10, 15% equity in that property already, and no first buyer ever does that when they buy their first home. So that's a great opportunity for them.
Fantastic.
That's one of my sort of tips for that, I guess, for new builds. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having us on. It's been a real trip. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll be sure to let you know what feedback we get from our listeners in due course. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing the podcast up live as our first ever Lateral Lawyers podcast in the new studio.
Absolutely, you're inspiring me to good things.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.